In spring 1934, Italian archaeologist Dr. Lorenzo Belandi and his small team started digging in the limestone hills near Enna, central Sicily. A road construction crew had accidentally blasted open a narrow cave entrance that had been sealed by fallen rock for centuries. When the dust cleared, several local workers crossed themselves and left the site immediately. They refused to take their pay or explain why. All they would say was that the cave was older than people and never empty. Inside the cave, the team found clear signs of very long-term human use. The walls were black with layers of old smoke. The floor had scattered stone tools, simple scrapers and axes worn smooth from heavy repeated use over generations. There were shallow hollows carved into the rock floor, like sleeping areas, but sized for people noticeably shorter and stockier than modern humans. Deep scratches ran along the tunnel walls. Parallel marks, 4 or 5 fingers wide, too wide and too consistent for any known animal in Sicily. At the back of the main chamber, they discovered 5 mummified bodies. They were crusaders from the medieval period, sitting upright against the wall. The dry cave air had preserved them naturally, skin tight over bones, lips pulled back from teeth, eye sockets empty. There were no signs of injury. No broken bones, no stab wounds, nothing to suggest a fight. Their armor had been removed and stacked neatly nearby in 5 separate piles. Each pile was shaped roughly like a seated person. On the wall directly behind them was a large painting made with charcoal, red ochre, and animal fat. It showed short, heavy-bodied figures with thick brows, long arms, and hunched postures. They had wide mouths full of blunt teeth. The scenes depicted these figures crawling out of tunnels surrounding armored men and dragging them down into the ground. Other parts showed a dark underground river. People crossed it and came out looking different. Thicker limbs, reflective eyes. Next to the paintings were symbols in an unknown script, older than Greek or Latin influences on the island, unlike anything Belandi had seen before. One symbol kept repeating near images of fire, tunnels, and screaming faces. In his notes, Belandi loosely translated it as "those who remained" or "the ones who stayed behind." The dig ended in 1943 during the Allied invasion of Sicily. Heavy artillery fire collapsed the hillside and buried the cave entrance completely. Belandi survived the war but died in 1947. Most of his notes and photos were filed away in archives and rarely mentioned again. To figure out how 5 crusaders ended up mummified in that cave, we need to look back to 1190. That year, King Richard I of England, Richard the Lionheart, arrived in Sicily with his crusading army on the way to the Holy Land. Historical records mention supply problems, local riots in Messina, and a short occupation. But Richard left the island earlier than expected, skipping opportunities that would have helped later in the crusade. He never returned to Sicily, even when it made military sense to do so. The only detailed personal account comes from Brother Matthias, a Benedictine monk who traveled with the crusade as a chronicler. His name appears in official lists, and records show he was quietly dismissed from his order after returning to France, no reason given. His writings survive only in fragments, copied into margins of other manuscripts and often dismissed by later monks as unreliable or superstitious. Matthias described odd things happening around the Crusader camps: farms abandoned overnight, livestock killed but left uneaten, small stone piles arranged in shapes like people or circles appearing along roads and fields. Local Sicilians warned the Crusaders not to go near certain hills. They spoke of an ancient group they called the Figli delle Colline, the Children of the Hills. According to the locals, these were people from before recorded history, older than the Greeks or Carthaginians. They had been forced underground long ago by massive floods. They crossed an underground river, and those who made it through were changed. They stopped aging, stopped living on the surface, and became guardians of the caves below. They watched the world above through cracks and punished anyone who disturbed what was hidden there. Crusader scouts started disappearing. Days later, their helmets and weapons would turn up, placed carefully outside camp gates or along paths. One helmet was filled with river stones and animal bones. Another sat upside down by a well, dripping dark water. The strange markers kept appearing closer to camp, always at night. Richard sent a patrol into the hills. They found a large network of caves, deeper and more connected than expected. Matthias described glimpses of the inhabitants: short, very strong, pale skin moving low and carefully, They didn't attack head-on. They put out torches, blocked tunnels, and pulled men deeper into the dark. Several knights vanished without a sound. 5 were captured alive. Matthias wrote that Richard went down into the caves himself with a small group to find them. What happened isn't described in detail, but when the king came back up after several days, he was different. In a private talk with Matthias, Richard asked if God had ever walked underground, and if something older than sin might lie beneath our feet. He said the beings below didn't hate humans, they simply existed there, unchanged for ages. That unsettled him more than any enemy ever had. Richard ordered the entire force to leave Sicily right away. They sailed for the Holy Land without delay. Before departing, one last sign appeared at dawn outside the camp. 5 complete sets of armor arranged in a circle of stones, posed as if the empty suits were sitting in prayer. No bodies were inside. Matthias's writings stopped soon after. He was dismissed from the order. Later monks called him troubled and overly focused on old pagan stories. In 1934, when Belandi found the 5 mummified crusaders, the way their armor was arranged matched Matthias's description closely. The cave paintings lined up with what the monk had written. In one crossed-out note in Belandi's report, he wrote, "These men weren't killed by legends. They were left behind to guard something much older than history, and they may still be guarding it. The cave is gone now, destroyed by wartime bombing. The hills are quiet. No official records mention the children of the hills again. But in some remote parts of Sicily, people still avoid certain sinkholes after dark, and every so often, locals report a faint scraping sound from deep underground.